Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, Season 4, Episode 9. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our special guest on this episode recorded live in person at the Coffee Association of Canada's annual conference in Toronto, Rick Brown, President, Foodservice, Circana.
Circana, what a great company. So Rick is our second guest from Circana. We had Vince, I think it was last year at the Seattle, or this year at Seattle.
This year, yeah.
It's been a long year.
yeah.
But no, Rick's our conversation with Rick was really fascinating, and it was great to see him at the coffee show.
Yeah, and he's the second, speaking of second, he's the second interview we recorded at the coffee show, so we got a couple more to come up in subsequent weeks, and we've actually filled out our guest roster for the rest of the year plus, so lots of great content coming up in the months ahead. Now, let's tap into the news. Stats Canada puts out a report on food insecurity. Let me see some highlights or lowlights, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Really it's just getting worse, not better. Families where a woman was the main breadwinner likely to face food insecurity. No surprise there. That rate shot up to 41% when homes where women were single parents. So now you're also on the board of Second Harvest. In fact, you had an event and a board meeting right after the Coffee Association of Canada. Not that we could get there. We left the coffee conference downtown Toronto, the Globe and Mail Center, and jumped in an Uber and sat in traffic for an hour and went about 50 feet. So we just decided to just get out of the car, went and had dinner, and an hour and a half later got back in another Uber and went out to Etobicoke. So anyway,
and on my flight back to Halifax, I wrote a letter to Her Worship Mayor Chow, but I forgot to send it. So I may send it later today. I mean, I don't know what's going on with downtown Toronto. I mean, why would you ever organize an event there now?
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, beyond the scope of the podcast, but there's the Ontario line, construction, road, anyway. So it's bad. It's bad, and it does actually bring some relevance to this podcast because, are you going to go downtown for dinner? Are you going to go out for dinner? You can't get around. And that's not even the worst day, right? That was a Thursday, which is not the worst day of the week by the numbers. Wednesday's the worst day of the week. So anyway, so let's talk about food insecurity. What did you think of the StatsCan report? Did you pick up any other insights from your board meeting and event? And let's talk about that.
Well, let's pile on all of the reports telling us that more and more people are getting hungry in Canada. Oh my God! I mean, you also had a report coming out of the Daily Bread Food Bank in Etobicoke. They just released again this week. They released a report saying that 1 out of 10 Torontarians are actually using a food bank or had to use a food bank this year. According to StatsCan, 18% of Canadians have actually experienced food insecurity. Those are really troubling numbers. So when you look at the East, in the Maritimes where I live, numbers are much higher. Lowest numbers are in Quebec and BC. I think BC is an interesting case because at 16%, when you think about real estate, I mean, where do you think most Canadians believe? And I believe that the real estate, I mean, I'm actually in Vancouver right now. I can tell you, real estate is pretty darn expensive.
Yeah, people live in their money there. But they do have one of the
lowest food insecurity rates in Canada after Quebec, which is, I think, interesting. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they've gotten organized around food insecurity with farmers markets. They have this coupon program given to about 10,000 families. Instead of giving out grocery rebates, not knowing whether or not the money is going to be spent on food, they actually send gift certificates, very discreet gift certificates to different folks through non-for-profit organizations, and families can actually go to farmers markets and buy fresh local products. They can cook with those products. It's not ultra processed or anything like that. And they go home and they get the support they need in order to survive and have access to a healthy diet. Nova Scotia has done it. Montreal has also done it. I think it's high time that we look into a program like this nationally to help our food insecurity situation. It is the cheapest way to help as many people as possible. The BC program costs $1 million a year.
That doesn't seem like a lot of money to me.
It's nothing. And you don't need bureaucracy either, because all the setup is already there. That's what happened in Nova Scotia. All you need to do is to empower some NGOs to actually steward the program. Mm-hmm. And so now we're hearing all sorts of things like, let's build more homes. Let's come up with a guaranteed minimum income program. All of these things are valuable, but they're very costly.
And they're not going to happen overnight.
They're not going to happen overnight. And right now, when you look at the tax burden that we put on Canadians, I'm not sure there's any appetite right now to increase taxes. So you got to be careful with expenditures.
Well, the government seems, at least the federal government seems to be very fond of just summoning people to their doorstep to hector them, but not really coming forward with any ideas that I've heard in the past 6 months, other than hectoring grocers and suppliers. So if you're listening, once again, feds, lots of ideas on this podcast. And here
Absolutely.
You go. You've testified. We've given you ideas, so you can't. What is it? That the failure of imagination, I think. Is
I've testified before the Finance Committee, and that's it. That's the recommendation I gave, is to nationalize a nutritional gift certificate programs through farmers markets around the country. I think it's a low hanging fruit. It's easy. You can implement this in weeks. It's very easy to do.
Weeks. And people are hungry today.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of sending out $2.5 billion worth of money without knowing for sure you're gonna actually impact people's lives, let's actually figure this thing out.
Yeah. All right. Well, no shortage of ideas. Hey, one quick question about food insecurity. We know that there's been a rampant abuse, really, of foreign students being brought into Canada in hundreds of thousands. And I've seen in the media, I can't remember where, that they're showing up at the food banks. Yep. But I think the food banks are saying, no, you're not eligible or something. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, we do have some in at Dalhousie. It's a bit of a problem, but I think it's more, the problem is more cultural, to be honest. It is really about, foreign students coming into Canada, and of course they're supposed to be independent financially, but the reality is that they're not. A lot of them are sent by their parents for a better life, and some of them are really struggling financially. So we actually did a survey in the Atlantic earlier this year about campus food banks, and a lot of people who do visit food banks are foreign students. And it's not because they're taking advantage of the system. It's just they don't have any money. And I get international students walking into my office every week asking me for a job. That's the reality. And let's not forget, there are restrictions for them to work in Canada. And so keep that in mind. So if you're struggling financially as an international student, you don't have many options.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of research, I think you've got some research coming out from the lab very soon. And what's on the docket for the rest of the year out of the lab? Of course, the big kahuna of research is coming out early December with Canada's food price report. But anything else in the hopper?
Yeah, no, actually, so we're going to be pricing out. We have a new tool that we're using to actually understand what's going on with pricing across the country. So we'll be using this new tool. We call it the Food Price Portal. We've been working on this over the summer. I don't think I even talked to you about this before, but we've been spending a lot of time doing that. And so we're going to be pricing out the cost of a traditional Christmas dinner in Canada.
Okay.
And so not using StatsCan's numbers, because they don't list a bunch of things like turkey, cranberries, eggnog. I mean, there's lots of items that are on a traditional Christmas table that aren't necessarily listed. So we do have access to that data, and so we'll be pricing out how much it will cost and what is the increase compared to last year. The food price report on December 7th, of course. And after that, we'll have our good old end of the year survey about how people intend to cope with food prices in 2024 and what are their New Year's resolution. That's a very popular survey, typically during the holidays.
Okay. Well, we'll all look forward to that. Of course, it'll be a very special episode on Canada's Food Price Report. That must be close to being in print. I mean, we keep talking about it every week. You finish the copy and it's reviewed. So look forward to that. I'm sure you'll get a few media impressions around the world on that. Let's talk about beer. I love beer.
Yes.
Let's talk about Brewers Retail. So for those around the country, Brewers Retail is this weird thing that was started, and I actually did some research, started back in 1927, actually, where in Ontario, which has had its own and has its own particular liquor and beer regs, where there was basically a monopoly about who could sell beer in the province. Now, you go to Quebec, and it's available in Depanier, and it's available in all kinds of different things. Alberta, it's private sector. I think the original intent of what became Brewers Retail was to support the big Canadian brewers, right? Labatt and Molson.
And they were Canadian.
And they were Canadian. And they were owned, right? So they owned the beer store. And one of the innovations we have to call out is their recycling program, which has just been a phenomenal success.
Yeah, you got to give the store that for sure.
Huge credit for that. Both beer and so in the province, you return both your beer empties and your wine bottles to Brewers Retail, and they do massive work in recycling. Now, over the course of time, two things have happened. Right, one is both Molson and Labatt's have been bought. They're not Canadian companies anymore. They make product here in Canada, but they're both owned by international companies. So that rationale kind of to protect, it's now owned by three foreign conglomerates, really, Anheuser-Busch, Molson Coors, and Sapporo, which are the parent companies of Labatt, Molson, and Sleeman. So the rationale there has gone away. And of course, the convenience stores, the grocers, everybody wants to sell beer. And we had a little crack in that, so to speak, a couple of years ago, where you can buy beer in grocery stores, but you can't buy it by the case. Now, a little bit of a history lesson, right? So the Ford government comes out and says, I'm breaking it up. I'm giving it to convenience stores. It should be available, ignoring, as is often the case with the premier, the facts that there is a contract in place and that there is a $1 billion
agreement,
$1 billion penalty for doing what he just said. So, of course, like many things, he had to walk it back. But I think the intent seems to be still there, and it was bubbling up in the news. It's been fermenting for several years. What do you hear? What do you hear about what could be coming down the pipe soon?
Well, in 2019, of course, Doug Ford did mention that he was going to end the oligopoly, because it is indeed an oligopoly, not necessarily a monopoly. It has the monopoly for some formats, like cases, for example, you can only buy at the beer store. But to me, the beer store is an emblem of the relationship that Ontarians have with alcohol. I mean, it's just the model itself is really obsolete as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how you feel. I mean, you do. I was a customer of the beer store for 7 years when I was living in Guelph. Hated it. Felt like getting bread during the Second World War.
It's different now. I mean, it wasn't until 1971 where up until the early 70s, you had to fill out a little form like consumers distributors to get your beer. The modern beer store is more like a retailer.
Do you enjoy going to the beer store, Michael?
No.
You're a retail expert.
I do have my beer. Well, to be fair,
I don't know anybody else who understands retail better than you, Michael LeBlanc.
Well, I have it delivered to my doorstep, so
look me in the eyes and tell me that you enjoy going to the beer store.
I do not enjoy going to the beer store.
There you go.
But not because of the people. I think it's not a people thing. It's just like I like it delivered to the doorstep. I don't get any joy out of going to the beer store. That's a whole different.
Oh my God! I feel like I have to take a number, and it feels. People think it's the government because it feels like it's the government.
Whatever this agreement was is coming to an end. I mean, the convenience store folks, for one, have been angling to sell as it is in Quebec and many other places? Do you think this might happen?
I don't know. They're going to have to figure out the bottle return issue. I think it's a big one.
That's a big one, right?
I suspect that the beer store model will survive, but it will be. First of all, we have to recognize that there are some beer stores closing little by little, and so I think that the owners of the chain are seeing the writing on the wall.
Yeah,
for sure. But it is a foreign-owned oligopoly. I mean, it's just bizarre to me.
Yeah.
And
it's a holdover from an earlier, different time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it needs to move on. But I think once you've settled on how to allow Ontarians to return bottles, and I mean, other provinces have figured it out. Look at Quebec. I mean, it's not rocket science. The other issue, of course,
what do you do in Quebec? By the way, what happens in Quebec?
Bottles can be returned to retailers. It's a bit of a problem. It's not a perfect system, I'll admit. Mm-hmm. But Quebecers can return bottles anywhere, and you got machines, machines that you can actually return your cans and bottles as well. So it's, and they've made that shift as well. There are some changes to the system right now, which is not ideal, but generally speaking, there are other ways to do this. Okay. The other thing that I think we should be concerned about are microbreweries. I mean, the beer store is not helping the microbrewery scene, and microbrewers have actually been quite great innovators. They've actually provided Canadians across the country with great new products, and this beer store, this oligopoly, has really made things a little bit tougher for microbrewers in Ontario, as far as I'm concerned.
Let's talk about grocery results out today. Grocery results, both Metro and Loblaw's released results. Let's talk about Metro first.
What would you think? What did you think of the numbers today?
Wow, I mean, Metro's results, same food store sales up 6.8%. Now, it is a 13-week versus a 12-week quarter, so there's a bit of that. But amazing
That's above
results.
Inflation.
Amazing results considering they also had labor issues during this time, right? So they weren't firing on all...
In Ontario.
Right? So 6.8%. And then Loblaw's had, and we'll get back to Metro because we want to talk about their new distribution center. And Loblaw's, similarly, they had same-store sales up 4.5%. So this nets out, and that's grocery sales.
So Loblaw's below water when it comes to food inflation, and Metro's above.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, yeah. So right now, I would say that Metro is much more profitable. I'm not saying that Loblaw's is not doing well, but it's doing okay, but not as great food sales wise than Metro. Other components of Shoppers Drug Mart is doing very well.
I'm just talking grocery sales. Yeah,
just grocery sales, but Shoppers doing very well. Yesterday, I thought that Loblaw's launched a really interesting initiative with a new supplier program, small supplier program. I think it's about aligning the company with people consumers love, like farmers and small processors. I think it's a great move for Loblaw's to actually do this. The problem is that it hasn't gotten really a whole lot of attention media-wise because nobody understands the value of these programs. I understand the value of these programs. You do as well, Michael. But I think it's a great move for Loblaw's. They need to become a little bit more democratic and open to smaller suppliers instead of just apply same rules to all and see smaller outfits not survive.
Well, and it is the what do we call it? The contradiction of success or the paradox of success, because the bigger you get, and then it gets harder to deal with at scale with small innovative retailers, vendors, and then consumers start seeing that on the shelf. It's like nothing new here. It's all the big players, which is fine. But you don't. I mean, I think Empire and Sobeys does a really good job of this because how many food innovators have we talked to? Their first thing when we talk groceries, it's on Sobeys shelves. Like
the thing about Sobeys and Metro is that they have many independents within the system. Reminding them all the time about the smaller outfits. Loblaw's doesn't have that luxury.
TNT does a good job of that. I think TNT division.
And TNT is separate. And so is Fortino's. So it's just different a little bit. I think Loblaw's focus is one President's Choice in Brampton, to be honest. I don't think they have that openness as Empire and Metro have still, I think that Loblaw's recognition yesterday that smaller suppliers can actually play an important role is has merit. I think it was a good move for them.
Well, and for them, that I think is the first statement I've seen in public by their new president, Per Bank. Welcome to Mr. Bank, and once again, for the Loblaw's folks listening to the pod, if you're listening, we'd love to have him on and help introduce him as his background and all those great things that we talk to people about on the show. So there's an open invitation. Now, let's talk about Metro's new DC distribution center, state-of-the-art stuff. And, you know, you're just such a big advocate, fan, proponent of technology that both increases efficiency and, you know, makes
and
up
you
for
don't
people.
get it. So, man, why do you get all excited about a distribution center? Like, what's the big deal?
I get excited about it. I love distribution. So what did you think of
I'm actually going to be visiting the facility on December 8th, just so you know. I was invited by Metro, so I'm happy to, because I'll be in Montreal and the facility's in Terrebonne. So I'm looking forward to it. I just love touring distribution centers, and this particular one is, it's not the largest in Canada. I believe the largest in Canada will be in Newmarket. The Loblaw's facility there, 1.2 million square feet.
Wow,
this one is half the size, but the technology is just state of the art. I mean, it's just incredible. So they're closing 3 centers to open up this one. No loss of jobs. A cafeteria with local foods, a daycare center. I mean, you can
daycare.
You can see.
Why don't?
Oh yeah.
Anyway, don't get me started on daycare centers in business. Why don't more businesses offer daycare? They complain they can't fire people, but they don't do anything innovative. That's innovative. That's a great solution, right?
Exactly. Well, Sobeys just dealt with a strike with their DC in Toronto, and so you got to take care of your employees. You got to think beyond the job. And to me, that's the future. So kudos to Metro. I think it's a great facility. I think it's the future. That middle mile, investing in a middle mile is the key in food distribution in Canada, especially in Canada. And that's how grocers are going to make money in the future. We've been talking a lot about the last mile, but to me, Loblaw's was really ahead when it comes to making the middle mile more efficient logistically. But now you could see that both Sobeys, Empire, and Metro are catching up.
All right. Well, listen, we got lots more to talk about. Let's take a break now and let's get to our interview with Rick Brown, live from the Coffee Association of Canada's annual conference.
All right, our special guest today is Rick from Circana, not our first guest from Circana. We've had Vince on before, but happy to meet you and see you here at the Coffee Conference live here. And you were on a panel earlier today, which I thought was very interesting, very data-rich panel. It was all about data, which is why when I went on stage, I thought, well, maybe I should, keep it cool on the data stuff, because you guys did such a wonderful job giving us a clear picture of what's actually happening in the market. So welcome to our podcast. So tell us more about you and your role at Circana.
Oh, thanks, guys, and I'm so pleased to be here. Yeah, my name is Rick Brown, and I oversee the food service, beauty, apparel, and footwear businesses in Canada for Circana. So it's a pretty diverse portfolio, but and I don't, they're all my children, so I love them equally, but maybe I do have favorites, from time to time. And it was great to be here with Robert, and I got a chance to speak to what we're seeing at food service in terms of coffee trends. But because Circana is looking at a broader picture of retail, like we track, my role is across multiple industries, but there's many more. The whole point of Circana, which is a new company, it was born out of the merger of the NPD Group and the IRI company. So our mission is really to have a more complete view of the consumer and all of that consumer behavior to better unlock growth for our clients. So it was great to talk about food service and coffee, and been a fun day so far.
Yeah, that's great. And so is this your first time at the Coffee Association convention?
I think it is my first time.
Okay.
Like Vince, normally he's our industry analyst, and he's such a great spokesperson for the brand and the business. But he was double booked. So, a couple months ago, he was like, Rick, you should go and present. And a couple months ago, it seemed like a great idea. Last night when I was like rehearsing, I'm like, wow, I don't know if this was a great idea.
I have that every time I book an early morning flight. It sounds like a great idea, but when the alarm goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, what the heck did I do that? Let's just talk about Circana for a little bit more. So as you said, it's becoming a very familiar name. You're so imbued into the industries. But what makes you different? What makes you different from all the other types, or if there's anyone like you? Like, why do you stand out, and how do you build your business?
Well, I would first start with the most important asset, which is the data. So we have extensive relationships, in particular from the NPD side. We were really the only ones that had complete coverage of the general merchandise categories, so those slower moving categories. I think in Canada, it's well known that the role Nielsen plays on the CPG side, but IRI globally has a very strong footprint in those industries. So the combination of those two companies coming together really does offer a unique, full picture of the consumer. And in addition to that, one of the greatest assets that IRI had was a very leading edge technical platform that was much more user friendly. It was much more quicker and efficient for like an analyst at a company to go from the actual data to the insights. So the goal is always like 3 clicks from data to insight.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's really going to really surprise people, the efficiency that they're going to be able to leverage data to make better decisions. And finally, after the data and the platform, it all comes down to the people, and specifically the thought leadership. They're the ones who bring it all together and make the data sing, and that's what we're really trying to offer at Circana.
Fantastic. Now, you, as Savannah said, you were on the stage. What kind of wisdom? What were you dropping? What kind of knowledge were you dropping to the sold-out crowd here?
Yeah.
Well, I took a big picture approach, and I know there was a lot of people that came before me, and as Sylvain mentioned, there was a lot of numbers being thrown around, and maybe death by numbers to a certain degree. So I was trying to tell more of a story about the opportunities that are emerging in the economy and in the retail space, because even though there's a cautious consumer, it's quite clear that they're willing to spend on certain categories and certain products. Yep. And probably more importantly, they're spending on doing things more than buying things. And that's a great opportunity for food service. And I think we all know coffee is one of the most affordable luxuries or pleasures that we have, and it's probably one of my favorite things I do to start the day. And there's a real place and opportunity for coffee, in this downturn. And I didn't get a chance to bring it up because I was worried about the time on the stage, but one of the biggest innovations and changes in food service happened during the Great Recession, and that was that we saw the emergence of very expensive, quick service premium burgers. Think about Five Guys, Burger Priest.
Yeah. Sure.
The notion of a much more expensive burger at QSR actually came out of that Great Recession because people started trading down from casual dining restaurants, where maybe at the time it was like $15.99.
But they wanted something in the middle.
Yeah, you could save $10 and still get like a casual dining restaurant quality burger, but you got it from a quick service restaurant.
That's right.
And now the market's flooded with it. So innovation and opportunity is going to happen all around us, right? But you have to
Do you have a sense of what that may look like in a few years from now, you think?
Well, part of what I was focusing on my talk today, and grounded in coffee, which is I like
the way you put that. No, I like the way you put that.
That was an accident. But I was focusing on...
You're born to do this.
He's good with puns. He's the king of puns, Michael.
I recognize a good pun.
You should have been helping Richard Sutherland with his coffee jokes.
Oh, yeah.
But I was focusing on some of the emerging trends in coffee. And I mean, these aren't groundbreaking, it's not like nobody's heard it before, but as the younger generations are shifting to different types of coffee, and they're much more willing to experiment and play around with different beverages, and that creates a huge opportunity because as the older consumers are aging out and going to food service less often, you need to change the product mix and how you're trying to address consumer needs. And I think it's like Wayne Gretzky always famously said, you pass the puck to where the player's going, not to where they are. So I think you just have to, pick a trend that fits with your brand or your consumer set and be authentic about it, and then, make a go for it and shoot.
In terms of, the industry itself, do you think that they see that? Like, you have customers, you have clients. Is it easy to convince them that things are going to be brighter as the sun comes out? Brighter?
Wow, that was good timing. That's powerful. Exactly.
Over the next, I'd say, 12 months, because it's been a difficult year for a variety of reasons in 2023. Consumer skepticism, costs, labor.
Your recent study, right? We were talking about it on the pod.
Customer satisfaction very low.
It's not happy with the value they're getting. There's a bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah, exactly. So, do you think that they actually see like a brighter future over the next little while?
I don't know if you can see it, through all the storm clouds that we're being bombarded with on the news, and all the measures on the economy tend to be trending down. So I think there is a, well-founded nervousness. But I do think Canadians are optimists, like who else would live here when you head into the dark days of winter? The only thing that keeps you going is knowing that spring's around the corner. But it is tougher and tougher to get companies to spend on investment or future ideas when, the financial constraints are as tight as they are. But I think the winners in the market right now will be the ones that identify an opportunity that fits their brand, their product, their consumer set, and they go for it. Same as what happened in the pandemic. Those that were quick to transition and say, look, the only way I'm going to connect with this consumer is digitally or through delivery or, on some other platform. Some of those businesses had a heyday and never had a better time. So, you got to pick your spots to be willing to spend.
Mm-hmm. And I was actually, you dovetailed right into a question I was going to ask you, because you talked about the innovation that happened in burgers in the Great Recession. What are the top innovations in your mind in food service that happened around coffee or otherwise because of the COVID era? We saw a kind of a leap forward in direct to consumer. But that's still a niche, right? Most coffee is not sold direct to consumer. Anything else come to mind? And I look around and I see these great displays here from all kinds of coffees from all kinds of different nations. Are people looking for more choice and something more remarkable, maybe?
Well, I think for sure they're looking for a higher quality cup of coffee, and we saw that from our small domestic appliance business. And I joked about people investing in $6,000 or $10,000 espresso machines for their homes, and part of that was a joke, but part of it was based on reality. And we're still seeing certain categories grow because people are investing in quality. But when it comes to innovation, I think we've seen tremendous leaps in a lot of the RTD, or ready-to-drink beverages. And although it might have been a no-no in certain coffee shops or restaurants to have those types of products that are typically reserved for retail be in the kitchen, but I think why not? Like the younger consumer is looking for a much more diverse array of beverages. So you can either tackle that through the innovation from the manufacturer, or you can maybe leverage some of the cool technology that's affecting equipment. And I think actually you were talking about the impact of AI, and it's like, it's almost like if that machine knows Rick likes his coffee at this temperature and 3/4 of a cup full because I don't want to spill it in my car. That's how you're going to build a true engagement and a loyal customer, because it's like they know how to do it the way I want it. And I think that stuff is actually quite cool.
Restaurants Canada came out a couple of weeks ago with a really scary number. They mentioned that over 50% of their members are losing money. Is that something you see right now on your dashboard at Circana?
So we wouldn't see that in our data. And it was interesting because I was up there trying to present, the positive components of the market, and I was doing a bit of cheerleading for, the growth that we've seen in dollars and traffic. But yeah, I'm well aware of that stat from Restaurants Canada. They're a great partner of us, and I plug for Chris Elliott, who's a big partner with Vince and I. But yeah, that's a staggering number, and I actually asked Vince about that after the Canadian Investment Leadership Summit that was just in Toronto last week, because that was a topic of conversation, right? And Vince was like, oh, I would, if I had been asked, I would have liked to have shared that there probably needs to be more education for that small restaurant owner who might be a great chef and who might have a great sense of hospitality and design and decor. But how can you better educate them on even simple things like keeping the books? Like if your menu prices aren't quickly adjusting to inflation or the food costs, you might be losing money before you even realize it, and it might be too late.
Too late, yeah.
So I think that there a lot of work needs to be done on education, and so you talked a lot about like how the consumer or the Canadian citizens in general can kind of be duped into thinking that the wrong thing is the villain, or that it's like political jousting as to whose fault everything is. But at the end of the day, it's restaurants who have to increase their prices, like that single unit restaurant owner or 2 or 3 chains in a city. They're not raising their prices because they want to make $2 million instead of $1 million. Like they're literally trying to fight for their life.
Survival.
And I think if consumers understood that, I think they'd feel a bit better. And, we're all being pinched. And sometimes I got to remind myself, even if it wasn't a perfect experience, tip big, like I was that age once. I worked in food service, and I got to just like tip big, if you can afford it, tip big. It doesn't have to be a perfect experience, but let's help each other out.
And what we're noticing in our data is that there are fewer people like you, willing to say, what, I understand. People are running out of patience because they're being personally affected by what's going on with inflation and the cost of living. That's the thing, and I'm certainly concerned about that. And I said that during my talk. I mean, if you continue to see more people leaving the restaurant not being satisfied, that's a problem if it continues. So you kind of have to adjust and. Raising your prices right now, to your point about raising prices, perhaps a lot of these chefs aren't raising prices, but they're also cutting corners, and people are noticing.
Yeah, I think they're worried about raising prices. On last week's podcast, we talked about a Michelin star restaurant in Northern Ireland that just kind of made the news. It said, very bespoke. They said, listen, we just can't charge prices that they don't make sense anymore. For our market anyway. I mean, maybe they make sense in, the big urban markets where you got a business community who will be expensing it anyway, kind of thing. My last question, then I'll pass the mic back to Sylvain to wrap us up. One of the characteristics of Canada now is a tremendous growth in new Canadians. 1.5 million. I mean, do the whatever the math is. How are you seeing that? And are you starting to see that in the data? And is it your expectation we see more diversity in the offerings, or how do you think that's going to get reflected in what you're seeing in food service?
Yeah, well, we're certainly seeing in the numbers, and when you look at the stats, the visible minorities in a lot of the major cities, especially Toronto, are going to become the majority, which is a really interesting and cool thing. And of course, with that comes new flavor, global flavor, trends, and preferences. And you do see that in menus, and it starts slow. It starts with simple things like maybe it's a chicken tender wrap. Which is not very global at all, but then if it's got a bit of Thai sauce on it, or some Cajun seasoning, or some, spice from Africa, like that's how it starts. It takes something that's familiar and you add something that's a little more daring or global, and then that's how you move the masses. So I do think we're going to see it, and there will be a shift. And that's going to affect everything in food service, from the food, the expectations of service, and even beverages, coffee, and others.
Circana is well known, but still, you got lots of data, lots of report. How can you get a hold of all that stuff that you know?
Well, we're available online. Look up Circana.com. Search Vince Scaboloni, as you say, friend of your show. He is our industry expert.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us here live at the Canadian Coffee Association's Coffee Conference. It was great to not meet you. We met at Seattle, but great to have you on the mic. And thanks for joining Sylvain and I live. And listen, we wish you continued success. We'll put some links in the show notes to your stuff. And safe travels. And we look forward to seeing you at the next industry event.
All right. Thank you both.
All right.
All right, well, we were just talking about the grocers. Any comments on Loblaw's recent, we haven't talked much about the code of conduct because it's in process and all that stuff. And I guess they...
So we gave kudos to Loblaws. Let's actually criticize some of the stuff that they just did. Because, they actually criticized, they registered concerns about food affordability. They've argued without any data, of course. It seems to be in fashion these days, that Canada's food basket would become more expensive with the code of conduct. Do you buy that?
My understanding from what you've written is that it's neutral to positive. I've never seen it negative, but where do you think they're coming from? What do you think they're drawn from?
Well, I mean, first of all, they have a lot to lose. I mean, they are in control. That's one thing. Secondly, I think it's a little, I mean, they're trying to get Canadians to fear the code, and they're trying to politicize this issue. And politicizing the code is not an easy thing to do. So I do understand why they're doing this. They want to get Canadians to think about the code from their own perspective. But again, you need to actually provide some data. And when you look at price volatility, okay, not necessarily affordability, but volatility, you can see that in both Australia and the UK, where there is a code, even in Ireland, prices are much more stable. They do increase, but they're much more stable. In economics, in supply chain economics, things are pretty simple in the literature. The more vertical coordination there is, the more likely you'll see supply chain absorb shocks that do fuel more price volatility retail. It's a fact. The code increases vertical coordination across the supply chain. It doesn't diminish it. And so that's why I thought it was a bit rich for Loblaws to make a statement like this without any evidence at all. Because when you look at the theory actually would contradict Loblaw's statement.
Well, the latest back and forth is, listen, we're not going to negotiate this in the public domain, so I guess they're continuing to talk with and through the committee. Now, the target launch date for whatever this thing becomes is spring 2024, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
And so there is a new Minister of Agriculture in Canada. I don't know exactly. He hasn't mentioned anything. He's just useless, really. He doesn't really say anything. So I think the Minister of Quebec, André Lamontagne, who's been on our show before, he's really the champion of the code. I mean, because Quebec has a lot to lose because they have a lot of small food processors and independent grocers as well. And those are the two groups that are to gain quite a bit from the code. And so we'll see how it goes. And frankly, I'm not necessarily optimistic. I'll be honest with you. I think we need everyone on board for this code to work. And if you don't have Loblaws or Walmart, it's just not. I don't think it's going to work, fortunately.
Let's end the show with a bit of news on restaurants. We're going to have the President of Restaurants Canada coming up in the next couple of episodes. Ontario, back to Ontario, plans to ban unpaid restaurant trial shifts, which is part of an overall new labor law coming. So that's not staging. That's unpaid shifts to see if you're any good at what you do. So they're going to ban that behavior in restaurants. Now, our good friend Carl Boutet actually did a post in LinkedIn and asked your opinion. You probably haven't seen it yet, but it is a repost.
No, I didn't.
He just posted it. So the folks at eMarketer, Insider Intelligence, posted this really interesting chart, which is called the cost gap between dining out and eating at home in the U.S. So they do a CPI type index. It's a really interesting chart, but basically it says that food at home, and I'll just say the number, but we will post a picture of it, is 304.8, and food away from home is 358.8. Now, in October of 2013, those were together. So the gap seems to be widening. In fact, funflation is a thing. So any comments? It seems to be, that's a U.S. data. That we would expect that exactly same thing is happening here, right? It's more, the cost of eating out on an index level is continuing to increase, whereas the cost of food it's outpacing the cost of eating at home. You would expect that to be the same here in Canada, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Funflation. Yeah. It's, I know there's been lots of talk in the U.S. about funflation, but it's a reality here in Canada as well, and that's why I think that the food service industry is going to recalibrate. It's funny because a couple of years ago or last year we were talking about the Great Reset. Well, I think it's actually happening. Despite embracing the opportunity or not, it's happening. I think there's a lot of my biggest concern is that you're going to be seeing chains are doing fine, but independents aren't, and that's the struggle. So the funflation issue is impacting disproportionately independent operators much more so than chains, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And I'll post this graphic because it's pretty dramatic, the change that's happened over the past 10 years, right, from 2013 to 2023. It's not good. It's not good and it started before COVID, actually, looking at these.
Yeah. And as Rick said during our interview with him, and I mean, for every shift in the market lies an opportunity. And so I actually do think it's going to lead to something, a new segment or a new style of restaurant in the future, for sure. Given the fact that most millennials are severely impacted by this economic shift that we're actually going through right now.
Well, right back to our last episode, there's still great innovation happening. Top 10 new restaurants, chef's dream, and they start things, and it's a fascinating industry, and we wish everyone in it very well. So,
exactly.
Let's leave it there for this week. I'm Michael LeBlanc, Consumer Growth Consultant, podcaster, and you are?
I'm the food professor and sidekick of Michael LeBlanc, Sylvain Charlebois.
All right, so you're in Vancouver on the way home, so safe travels. I'm in New York for the rest of the week, and then I'm in Vancouver next week, so we're kind of flip-flopping around a little bit, but great to see you.
Enjoy your puffy bagels in New York.
We're going to Red Rooster. I'm going back to Red Rooster up in Harlem for dinner again, because that was so memorable. I want to go experience it again. So listen, safe travels, and we'll talk to you next week.
Take care. Bye-bye.